My name is Emily Carter, and I am 32 years old. Last Christmas, I believed I was finally going to have the kind of family dinner people frame in photos. I carried two bright truths that felt like sunlight after years of gray. Daniel, the man who steadies my heartbeat, had asked me to marry him. At work, I had been promoted to captain and received a commendation for leading a difficult supply push that saved time and lives downrange. I told myself that if I brought both pieces of news home, my mother would look at me and, for once, see more than a uniform. I serve as a logistics officer at Fort Liberty in North Carolina. My days are schedules and pallets, broken trucks and solved problems, soldiers who depend on me to make sure what they need arrives when they need it. I love the quiet kind of leadership that keeps other people safe. The uniform has shaped my spine, and it has taught me to speak softly until speaking softly no longer works. It is not glamorous, but it is honest, and it asks me to be steady when the world is not. At home, the rank on my shoulder never seemed to matter. My older brother Matthew is a lawyer in Boston. My younger sister Olivia is a surgeon in New York. My mother Patricia never lets a holiday pass without reminding the table of their victories. Whenever I call with news, there is a pause, a sigh, and a turn back to them. She once said the Army was not a real career, that it was where people go when they run out of options. I pretended I did not hear her and laced my shoes and ran until the anger cooled. My father Robert sees me more clearly. When his health wobbled last spring, I signed leave, drove him to appointments, and sat with him through the longest afternoon of my life. I kept the worry out of my voice and the hope in my hands. When bills came due, I shifted my own plans so my parents would not drown. It felt natural to help. It felt like what a daughter does, even if no one wrote it down or said thank you. For 2 months, I kept my engagement quiet. The ring lived in a small velvet box in the pocket of my coat. I wanted to tell them in person, beside the tree I grew up decorating, in the house on a quiet street in Richmond that still smells like cinnamon and pine on winter mornings. I told myself this year would be different. I told myself my mother would finally see the person I have become. The soldier, the woman, the leader. I was still believing that when I parked at the curb, when my father pulled me into a hug, and when my mother studied me from the doorway with that familiar thin smile. When I was a child, I learned quickly that being the middle child meant being invisible. Matthew, the eldest, was the golden boy. Every spelling test he passed was a triumph, every baseball trophy displayed like a relic. Olivia, the youngest, was the adored princess. If she threw a tantrum, it was called spirited. If she broke something, it was excused as creativity. And me? If I raised my voice, I was told to lower it. If I asked for attention, I was accused of being selfish. I buried myself in discipline. I woke up early, studied late, and chased grades like they were the only currency I could offer. Straight A's earned me a polite nod, while Matthew's B average was celebrated with cake. When Olivia stayed out past curfew, she was experimenting with independence. If I came home 10 minutes late, I was disrespectful. The double standard was relentless, and it shaped me into someone who thought love had to be earned by working harder, longer, and quieter than anyone else. When I told my parents I had chosen the Army, my mother's expression fell like I had just confessed failure. "That's not a real career, Emily," she said. "That's just following orders. Why can't you be more like your brother, using his mind, or like your sister, saving lives?" Those words burned. But the Army gave me what my own family would not: recognition, honor, and a place where effort mattered. I remember my first deployment overseas. The heat pressed down like an extra skin, and every decision meant the difference between a mission's success or failure. I was terrified, but I rose to it. I earned medals, commendations, and respect from soldiers who counted on me. Yet when I called home, my mother asked, "So when are you going to leave that nonsense behind and do something meaningful?" Despite her scorn, I kept helping them. When Matthew was studying for the bar exam, his funds ran short. Quietly, I sent him money from my savings. He never knew it came from me because Mom told me it would embarrass him. Olivia's scholarship didn't stretch far enough to cover her final semester of med school. I wired money then, too, cutting my own expenses to make sure she could finish. When Dad needed surgery, I didn't hesitate. I used my leave, sat by his bed, and covered the bills insurance would not. My mother called it doing what's expected. But inside, I was hoping that maybe, just maybe, she would see me as something more than the child who never measured up. Even now, after years in uniform, I sometimes hear her voice in my head, dismissing everything I've worked for. And yet, I kept showing up. I kept sending money, kept answering calls, kept telling myself that if I just did enough, one day she would look at me and say the words I had waited for my entire life, "I'm proud of you." That hope was what carried me toward Christmas, clutching my engagement ring, ready to share my news. What I did not know was that my mother had one more blow to deliver, the sharpest one yet. Christmas morning in Richmond carried the same rhythm it always had. The wreath on the front door was the same one I remembered from childhood. Pine needles stiff with age, ribbons slightly faded. Inside, the tree glowed with white lights, red ornaments, and the porcelain angel my grandmother had placed on the top decades ago. Cinnamon rolls baked in the oven, the smell wrapping around me like memory. For a moment, I let myself believe this year might truly be different. I parked in front of the house, the velvet ring box tucked deep inside my coat pocket. The cold air bit against my cheeks as I carried in the carefully wrapped gifts I had chosen weeks earlier. Each one personal, each one meant to show thoughtfulness. Dad opened the door, and his smile, warm and steady, erased some of the weight pressing on my chest. "There's my soldier," he said, pulling me into a hug. His arms were strong, even after surgery, and for a heartbeat, I was simply his daughter, not the forgotten child. "Emily," my mother's voice cut across the moment. She appeared in the hallway wearing a crimson sweater, pearls tight against her neck. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe. "That dress? It washes you out. And your hair? You wore it like that?" Her lips pressed into the thin smile I knew too well, the one that turned joy into dust. "Merry Christmas to you too, Mom," I said, forcing a calm I did not feel. "I actually spent an hour on it this morning." "Well," she replied, already turning toward the kitchen, "you should have spent 2. You should ask Olivia where she shops. She looks stunning today." In the living room, Olivia glowed in a navy blue dress that fit like it was stitched for her alone. She greeted me with a smirk. "Look who finally showed up. We were waiting to start." "I was 5 minutes late." "Traffic at the gas station," I explained, but my words evaporated into the air. Matthew sat on the couch, a designer watch flashing on his wrist, already absorbed in his phone. The gift exchange unfolded the way it always did. Matthew handed out high-end gift cards he had clearly grabbed last minute, and Mom gushed as if he had brought back treasures from a voyage. Olivia presented our parents with a weekend spa retreat, earning a chorus of praise. I gave Dad a leather-bound journal engraved with his initials, Olivia a custom stethoscope charm for her bracelet, and Mom a framed restoration of her wedding photo that I had spent weeks repairing from old negatives. Dad's eyes softened, running his fingers over the leather. "Beautiful, Em," he whispered. But Mom flipped the frame over once, barely glancing. "How nice," she said quickly. "Matthew, show everyone that watch from your colleague." The attention shifted, and just like that, my effort vanished into silence. Relatives began to arrive. Aunt Margaret and Uncle Henry, my cousins Sophie and James, and finally, Grandma Eleanor, regal in her winter coat. The house swelled with voices and laughter, but I felt myself retreat toward the kitchen, like always, helping Mom baste the turkey and set the table. As the clock in the hallway chimed 3, we all sat down to dinner. The fine china gleamed under the chandelier. Dad sat at one end, Grandma at the other, and I was placed between my youngest cousin and an empty chair. Conversations rose around me: Matthew's upcoming trial, Olivia's latest surgery, Sophie's wedding. I smiled when spoken to, but my hand kept brushing against the ring box in my pocket. I had chosen dessert for my announcement. In my mind, I saw it so clearly, the family quieting, me standing, the sparkle of the ring catching the light as I shared the news that I was engaged and newly promoted. I thought it would bring pride, laughter, and maybe even tears of joy. Instead, what came was silence, then ridicule, and finally, a blow so sharp it would split my family apart forever. Dessert was served just after 3:30, the same way it always had been. The smell of pumpkin pie and strong coffee drifted across the table. My heart pounded against the little velvet box in my pocket. This was it, the moment I had pictured on lonely nights in barracks and in the quiet hum of transport planes, the moment I thought would finally pull me into the circle instead of leaving me outside it. Grandma leaned forward first, her silver hair catching the light. "Emily, dear," she asked gently, "are you still serving down at Fort Liberty?" "Yes, Grandma," I said, smiling. "Actually, I have some really exciting news." Before I could go on, my mother's voice cut across the table. "Emily thinks wearing a uniform is the same as having a real career. I've told her time and time again she should consider something respectable, teaching, maybe nursing, not just moving crates." Heat flared in my chest. I forced my voice to stay calm. "It is more than moving crates, Mom. I was just promoted to captain. I'm leading soldiers now, and last month I received a commendation for operational excellence." "Oh, that's wonderful," Aunt Margaret said quickly. "Congratulations." I swallowed, my fingers trembling as I reached into my pocket. "There's something else, too." I opened the small box, the diamond catching the chandelier's glow. Daniel proposed. "We're engaged." For a heartbeat, the room stilled. Dad's face softened with pride. Grandma clapped her hands, and a few cousins murmured congratulations. But my mother's expression did not move. Her eyes were cold, flat. "When did this happen?" Olivia asked, leaning in. "In October," I said, smiling despite the chill. "He proposed on a hike in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was perfect." "October?" My mother's voice was sharp enough to slice glass. "So you've been hiding this for 2 months and only now decide to tell us? Typical of you, Emily. Always secretive, always withholding." "I wanted to tell you all in person, as a family," I replied, my throat tightening. Matthew spoke without looking up from his phone. "What does Daniel do again?" "He's a paramedic." "A paramedic?" my mother repeated, every syllable dripping disdain. "Well, at least that's stable. Not exactly a man of status, but better than nothing, I suppose." The words cut deeper than I expected. Daniel had saved lives on highways, in burning buildings, in the middle of chaos. To me, he was a hero. To my mother, he was a disappointment by association. Then Olivia smirked. "I hope he knows what he's getting into. Emily has always been the difficult one in the family." I looked at her in disbelief. "I'm not difficult, I've just—" "She is challenging," my mother interrupted, nodding. "She's never learned yet how to make life easy for herself or for anyone else." The laughter died. A silence fell over the table. My mother leaned back, her eyes fixed on me, and then she delivered the words that knocked the air out of my lungs. "You're 32, Emily. You live in a cramped apartment. You wear a uniform that no one outside the army cares about. You have never accomplished anything significant. You are the most useless child we have." The pie on my plate blurred. I heard the ticking of the grandfather clock, the clink of a fork set down somewhere far away, the hollow roar of blood in my ears. For 32 years I had swallowed comments, accepted comparisons, and carried burdens no one saw. But something inside me shifted then, something hard and steady, like the steel of the metals in my drawer. I pushed back my chair. My hands trembled, but my voice did not. "Then maybe it's time," I said, looking straight into my mother's eyes, "that everyone at this table learns the truth about your so-called useless child." The silence was so sharp it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. Forks hovered above plates, eyes locked on me as if I had just stepped onto a battlefield in the middle of Christmas dinner. My mother's smirk faltered for the first time in years, but I didn't give her time to regain it. "You want to know what kind of daughter is useless?" I said, my voice steady even as my hands shook. I pulled my phone from my pocket and unlocked the banking app. "The one who has been paying your debts while you pretend she's nothing." A gasp ran down the table. Dad's brow furrowed. Emily, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the $1,500 I've been sending every month for the last 2 years, so Mom's car wouldn't be repossessed. I'm talking about the $3,000 I gave last spring when the insurance wouldn't cover all of Dad's surgery. I'm talking about the money I wired for Olivia's licensing exam because she'd already drained her scholarship. Olivia's head snapped up, her face paling. What? I thought Dad covered that. No, I said coldly. It was me. Because Mom begged me not to tell you, said it would embarrass you. Matthew finally looked up from his phone, his face stiff. Wait, are you saying you paid off? Yes, I cut in. Your loans, Matthew. When your firm delayed your first paycheck and you were about to default, who do you think stepped in? Not Mom, not Dad, me. $4,000, money I had been saving for a down payment on a house. The room buzzed with whispers. Aunt Margaret stared at me wide-eyed. Grandma's hand pressed against her chest, eyes blazing toward Patricia. I held the phone up, screen glowing with rows of transfers. Do you want receipts? Because I have every single one. September 15th, 1,500 to Patricia Carter. October 3rd, another 1,500. November 7th, 2,000 for hospital expenses. December 19th, 1,500 again. Should I keep going? Dad's chair scraped loudly against the floor. His face had gone pale, but his voice was low, trembling with anger. Patricia, is this true? My mother's lips parted, closing again like she was swallowing glass. It's not what it sounds like. Emily insisted. No, I snapped. You called me crying about car payments. You called me panicked about Dad's bills. You called me begging to cover Olivia's exam. And every time I gave in because I thought maybe if I proved my worth, you'd finally see me. But all you did was take my money and then sit at this table and call me useless. Olivia's voice cracked. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Matthew looked stricken. Neither did I. Emily, if I had... You would have what? I shot back. Defended me when Mom tore me down? Treated me like more than background noise? No. Because it was easier for all of you to believe I was fine. Easier to let me carry the burden while you lived without looking back. I turned back to my mother. She was pale now, her hands gripping her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. You wanted to know what kind of man would propose to me? The kind who sees that I've been holding this family together while you strip me of dignity. The kind who sees that I'm not useless. I've been the backbone of this family all along. The room erupted, voices clashing, chairs scraping, the polished image of our Christmas dinner collapsing into chaos. But through it all, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking. I was standing tall, even as the walls of denial around my mother began to crack. And in that moment, I realized the power had shifted. I was no longer the overlooked daughter. I was the soldier calling the truth into the open. The dining room had turned into a storm. Voices overlapped. Chairs squealed against the floor, and the polished shine of Christmas had cracked wide open. Aunt Margaret demanded answers. Uncle Henry muttered that he had suspected something was wrong for years, and Grandma Eleanor's face had gone from shock to a simmering fury I had only seen once before in my life. I stood there, heart pounding but strangely calm, as if I were back on a mission, noise all around me, but my focus sharp. My mother rose slowly from her chair, her wine glass trembling in her hand. Emily, she said, her voice tight. This is not something to be discussed in front of everyone. Sit down. We'll talk privately. I shook my head. No. You humiliated me in front of everyone, Mom. You told this entire family I was the most useless child you had. Now they deserve to know the truth. All of it. Her mask slipped. Panic flickered in her eyes, but she tried to cover it with anger. You're being vindictive. You're trying to make me look like a bad mother. Grandma's voice cut through the clamor, sharp and commanding. Patricia, enough. You've treated this girl like she's less than her whole life. And now I see you've been taking her money while calling her worthless. Shame on you. My mother flinched, but I pressed forward, each word steady as steel. For years, I answered every call, every emergency, every crisis. And while you paraded Matthew and Olivia as success stories, I lived paycheck to paycheck to keep this family afloat. Not anymore. The Bank of Emily is officially closed. Gasps rippled across the table. Dad was staring at Mom with an expression I had never seen before. Betrayal mixed with disappointment. 2 years, Patricia? You've been hiding this from me for 2 years? His voice shook with restrained rage. Mom tried to reach for him, but he pulled his hand back. Robert, please, it's not what it looks like. It looks, he said, voice rising, like you've been bleeding our daughter dry while belittling her at every turn. It looks exactly like that. The room went quiet again, every eye flicking between us. I felt my throat tighten. But I didn't waver. I slid my chair back, picked up my coat, and slung it over my shoulder. Emily, wait, Olivia said, her voice fragile. Please don't go like this. I turned to her, my jaw set. I've spent 32 years waiting for this family to see me. I'm done waiting. My mother's face crumpled, but I didn't stop. If you want to see me again, it won't be as your scapegoat or your bank account. It will be as your equal or not at all. The air was heavy, the kind of heaviness that comes after an explosion. My relatives sat frozen, unsure whether to speak. Grandma's eyes followed me as I stepped toward the door, and she gave me the smallest nod of approval, as if to say, "Go, soldier." I opened the door to the freezing Virginia air. For a moment, I stood on the porch, the sound of muffled voices swirling behind me. Then headlights swept across the driveway. Daniel's truck pulled in, and he was out before I could even wipe the tears from my face. He wrapped me in his arms, the cold melting away against his warmth. "You did it!" he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. "You finally stood up to them." I buried my face in his chest, my shoulders shaking. What if I was too harsh? What if I just burned every bridge I had left? Daniel tilted my chin up, his gaze steady. "Emily, you've been paying your mother's car note while she called you useless. There's no universe where speaking the truth is too harsh." Behind us, the house buzzed with chaos. But out in the winter air, in Daniel's arms, I felt something new. Not guilt, not fear, freedom. And as we drove away from the only home I had ever known, I realized I wasn't leaving as the invisible child. I was leaving as a soldier who had finally claimed her own ground. The days after Christmas felt unreal, like I had walked out of one life and stumbled into another. My phone would not stop buzzing, calls, texts, voicemails piling up from every branch of the family tree. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't answer right away. I didn't jump to soothe anyone. I let the silence stretch, and in that silence, I could finally breathe. Dad was the first to leave a message that didn't sound like damage control. His voice cracked with something I had never heard from him before. Genuine regret. "Emily, I had no idea your mother was taking money from you. If I had known, I would have put a stop to it. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you more. You deserved better." Hearing those words felt like water on scorched ground. 2 days later, Matthew called, his tone subdued. "Emily, I just found out you paid off my loans. I thought Mom and Dad helped me. I never would have asked you to do that." I almost laughed at the irony. "You didn't ask, Matt. That's the problem. Nobody ever asked if I was okay. You all just assumed I'd handle it." He was quiet for a long time before whispering, "You're right. I was blind. I want to do better." It wasn't a full repair, but it was the first time he admitted fault. Olivia waited longer. When she finally called, her words were sharp. "I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this. Families help each other. You chose to give that money." My grip tightened on the phone. "Do you remember calling me the difficult one right after Mom called me useless? Do you know how that felt?" There was silence on her end. "I was just joking," she muttered. "It wasn't a joke to me," I said. "It never was." For once, Olivia had nothing to fire back. And then there was Mom. She called more than anyone, sometimes 6, 7 times in a single day. At first, her messages were furious. "You've embarrassed this family. You're being selfish." Then they shifted into desperation. Emily, please call me back. We need to talk about the money situation. Finally, one evening, her voice broke. I was wrong. I treated you terribly. You're not useless. You've been holding this family together, and I didn't want to see it. When I finally picked up, I didn't raise my voice. I set boundaries. The money stops, Mom. No more monthly transfers, no more emergencies covered, nothing. And the criticism stops too. If you can't treat me with respect, you won't be part of my life. Her breath caught. I'll try. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. Don't try. Do better. Because I won't settle for less again. 3 months later, everything looked different. Without the drain of supporting everyone else, I started saving for the first time in years. Daniel and I opened a joint account, not for anyone else's survival, for our future. At work, without the constant distraction of family crises, I was sharper, more focused. My commanding officer noticed and hinted at another promotion. But the real change wasn't just financial or professional. It was the way I carried myself. For the first time, I wasn't the invisible child waiting for approval. I was Captain Emily Carter, a soldier who had fought harder battles overseas and finally fought the one at home. And in that victory, I discovered something more valuable than medals or promotions. I discovered that I didn't need my mother's pride to know my own worth. 3 months after that Christmas, the life I was building finally felt like it belonged to me. The day of my wedding arrived crisp and cold. The early spring air carrying the scent of pine and new beginnings. Daniel and I chose a small military chapel just outside Fort Liberty. The pews weren't crowded, only filled with people who had stood beside us with respect and kindness. For once, the guest list was mine, not dictated by guilt or obligation. Dad walked me down the aisle, his hand trembling slightly as he passed me to Daniel. His voice cracked when he whispered, I'm proud of you, Emily, not just today, always. That single moment carried more weight than years of silence. Grandma Eleanor sat in the front row, her eyes bright with tears, beaming like she had been waiting for this day her entire life. My mother came too, dressed in elegant navy. She kept her words measured, her expressions careful. For the first time, she didn't criticize, didn't sigh in disappointment. It was as if even she understood that this was no longer her stage to control. During the reception, she raised her glass and said softly, Emily, I'm sorry it took me so long to see the woman you are. I hope you and Daniel build a beautiful life together. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. When Dad stood to speak, the room fell silent. His voice carried across the hall, steady and warm. My daughter Emily has been the backbone of this family for years, even when we didn't acknowledge it. She is strong, generous, and brave. Daniel, you are a lucky man. And as for me, I will spend the rest of my life making sure she knows how much she means to us. For the first time, I felt my worth recognized not in whispers, but in a public declaration. As Daniel and I danced our first dance, I looked around the room. Some relationships still carried distance. Olivia smiled politely. Matthew looked thoughtful and quiet. But others had healed. Aunt Margaret waved from the corner. My cousins clapped along to the music. And Daniel's family welcomed me with warmth I had never known in my own home. The most profound change, though, was inside me. I no longer needed their approval to breathe. I had my own family now, my own career, my own self-respect. I had learned the most important lesson of my life. Respect isn't begged for, it's enforced through boundaries. Love isn't proven by endless sacrifice. It thrives where it is given freely and returned with kindness. Looking back, I understood something my younger self never could. I was never useless. I was never invisible. I was a soldier, a leader, and a woman who had carried others long before she carried herself. And when I finally chose to set those burdens down, I found not only freedom but joy. So here's the truth. I wish someone had told me sooner. You teach people how to treat you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do for your family and for yourself is to stop accepting less than you deserve. That Christmas, I thought I was breaking everything apart. But in reality, I was rebuilding my life from the ground up. And as Daniel leaned close on the dance floor, whispering, "No regrets," I smiled and whispered back, "None at all." Because for the first time in 32 years, I wasn't waiting to be seen. I already knew my worth, and that made all the difference.